Okay. I'm John McDermott. I'm with the Northern Virginia chapter of Virginians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, VADP. This is the first year we're co-sponsoring this meeting, and we're very glad to be here. Great meeting. The question I want to ask, in the last General Assembly session, two bills or two different initiatives came about having to do with the use of the electric chair in Virginia. One was Delegate Surovell's bill to ban the use of the electric chair, which died in committee in the House. And the other was a bill that got from the House over to the Senate and vice versa to mandate use of the electric chair if the state ever ran out of the drugs that are needed to perform lethal injections. We were very grateful to SALT for John's and everybody's active support with us on this issue. It did get stopped in the Senate, and I guess I want to ask anyone who can respond what they think the prospects for this kind of issue in the future will be. Is there going to be another attempt to mandate the electric chair? What do you think is on the horizon? Thank you.
John, I think I'm still on the advisory committee to your group. I have been an active opponent to the death penalty ever since I've been in the legislature. I will tell you that I think we have an opening here if we can ban the electric chair, because most people now view how horrendous that notion is, on the one hand, of having an electric chair, but on the other hand, if we can't get the drugs, hey, maybe get rid of the death penalty. I suggested to the administration they may want to consider these as openings to have a moratorium. Will that happen? Remains to be seen. The likelihood of legislation like that coming back, I think, is probably likely. But at the same time, as we interest more people and as the public has become more aware of the death penalty issue, I think we have a better chance of staving it off. So, see you again.
Is there anything, Ken, that you would suggest that our groups do to head that off next year?
Well, again, I would suggest to you that it might be opportune that we take advantage of the year and start to correspond with the administration about the possibility of a moratorium.
Okay. Kathy Hudgens, I know, is involved in the Fairfax County budget, and what is the impact of the budget delay in Richmond going to have on the county? Kathy, you want to comment?
As you know,
don't want to put you on the spot.
Yes, you did. And I came to listen. Let me first say thank you to my General Assembly colleagues for the work that they've been doing. As you know, we have just had began the process in our budget, and there are some very key elements in terms of us having to be able to balance our budget with demands that we have. And I think some of those delays will have greatest impact on education schools, because they have to let their contracts and their funding that's coming to them will be very much dependent upon what funding we can do. So we have several of those, and I think in some places you've done some really good work for us, but if we're going to have a delay, we will be forced to do some things with taxes that we may not have the need to do if we are able to get through. I wish you well as you go back there and get it done quickly.
This young lady had a question here. Thanks, Kathy. Appreciate it.
Hi, my name is Alex Dixon, and you are my delegate. And so my question is this. As I told you earlier, I'm on the phone to you all the time to thank you for your positions. And, you know, you guys preaching to the choir here. We call you guys to say thank you. And I'm wondering, Delegate Plump, how effective is it to call someone who's not my delegate to say, hey, this is important to me? Because I find when I call Richmond, the very first thing they ask me is, what's your address? And if I'm calling and I'm like, my address is such and such, they're going to be like, you're not my constituent. Why should I be listening to you? You know, so I'm wondering if you could speak to that, please.
Well, it's like this. Politicians respond to which way the wind is blowing. So we've got to get a lot of storm. We've got to get a lot of wind blowing. And if it turns out in some of these districts that people aren't knowledgeable or aren't responsive, then we're going to have to carry some of the freight ourselves. yeah, they discount the fact that you may not be from the district, but if a whole bunch of those calls, I mean a whole bunch, and you know when this MERC was set up last year to look at potential Medicaid expansion, the Virginia Interfaith Center and SALT and other groups worked to try to bring that about. One legislator told me that she received on a weekend 1,500 emails. Now let me tell you, when you receive 1,500 emails, that's unusual for us. Even a dozen or so would be a lot for us on an issue.
Let's not encourage that.
Well, we want to encourage it because we want the legislators to know there's a whole lot of people out there thinking about this. So when you get that many emails, you start to not pay attention so much as to whether or not they're from your district. You start getting the notion that the public is viewing this way. So the problem we have is, you know, this is a love fest. I come because I build on your strength and the kinds of things you're interested in. And I want you to have assurance that the people who hear what you're interested in. So this is a love fest here. But we got to get bigger than this. We got to have more than 4 legislators up here. We got to have 20 legislators up here. And so it's among the few things we can do. So keep doing it anyway. Send your emails, but don't put your address on
Our SALT guidance on that has always been that if you're on the committee, you represent the whole state on that committee, and that we should, all of us should communicate our positions to that committee member, because he represents the entire state on the committee. And I have said in the General Assembly next to an aide that I have not met before, and just out of courtesy speaking, they say, well, what are you doing here? When I tell them, they say, oh yes, we've got emails on that. And they're not from Northern Virginia, so basically they are paying attention even though you're not a constituent. And as Ken said, don't put your address on, you know, just communicate. It's all about communication. Thank you. Okay, question back there.
Thank you very much. My name is Ellen Hayes. I'm representing Voice, Virginians Organized for Interfaith Community Engagement. My question relates to immigration, so I'm not sure who would be the appropriate person, but it's specific to something that happened, what, about 4 years ago or so, when then Governor took away the employee authorization document as a way to get a driver's license, and said, you know, you have to refer to this enormous long list of documents. And that has remained in place, even though the motor vehicle people have tried to make it a little bit more user-friendly. But I was wondering if there's any thought from the legislature that can make that a more streamlined process.
Well, thank you for the question. I think you're referring to, I'm not sure if it happened during the McDonald administration or not, but since 9/11, Virginia has taken the lead, from my perspective, in the wrong direction, but Virginia has taken the lead on restricting who is allowed to have driver's licenses issued by Virginia. And part of it, I mean, just from a policy perspective, I can understand, as you might remember, 4 or 5 of the hijackers on 9/11 received driver's licenses from across the street here in Arlington, and the DMV used that to board the planes. And so the concern was, if people aren't real residents of Virginia and they're not here legally in terms of the legal status, should they be issued licenses? So Virginia was one of the first states that changed that law to require less number of secondary documents that you need in order to prove your identity. And then many other states since then have followed that trend. Virginia continues to go down the wrong direction, if you want to call it that way. And as a state, the state obviously has its jurisdiction to decide, because driving is a privilege within the state. It's not a federal issue. So a state is allowed to decide what documents. We're going to try to push back on that, but more importantly than us trying to push back is 2 things has to happen. One is, at the federal level, we need a comprehensive immigration discussion. And the reason is because whether you are legally, permanently allowed to stay in the United States or not is not something that the state can do. That's a federal issue. If the federal government says, you know what, this category of people are now legally allowed to stay in the United States on a temporary status, or maybe on a path towards citizenship, That then gives the states the legal authority to say, okay, well, if that's the case, that person deserves the right to, the privilege to drive in Virginia. Right now, we don't have that, because there are some categories of people that the federal government says you're not supposed to be here, and they're not giving you relief, and therefore, at the state level, it's hard for us to say, well, even though they're not supposed to be here, we should recognize them legally. So it's a little bit of a chicken and egg situation, but we're hoping, and again, to the point that Ken just mentioned about writing letters, if you all can also weigh in on federal comprehensive immigration reform. President Obama's been out there pushing really hard. He's just in a meeting with all the civil rights groups last week. But that really has to happen at the federal level in order for us to, at the state level, to have changes. The second thing, though, is what we're going to try to explore, and I'm not an expert in this area, but we're going to try to explore if there might be things that the executive, the governor, can do using his power as the executive over the Department of Motor Vehicles through the commission to do that without legislative authority. I'm not sure if there is an opportunity to do that or not, but many times the executive has discretion. So we'll look into that a little bit and see if there's a way that Governor McAuliffe, through his agencies, might be able to make those changes so that folks that are here in America, that are working here, that need that transportation, that need that driver's license so that they can get insurance, what have you, those people have a chance to actually apply for that without the burden of having to hide in the shadows. And that, of course, affects all of our public safety as well.
If I could just add really quickly, and I don't need the mic, is this is an executive issue, I believe, because it was an issue that was made or caused by a decision by the McConnell administration. I've actually had two constituents who we've tried to help out on this issue, and so we have pushed back with no success, but with the change in administration, I think it might be time to start doing that again.
Question over there.
I've got kind of a basic question here. It has to do with water. Oh, my name is Linda Chernisky, and I'm involved in all the kind of organization here. But my question is to David Bloom, since you brought it up and you're involved with the environment. And back to the basic issue is water. And I'm very disturbed about the fracking. I come from out west, and I know what's going on out there in the states of Montana and particularly. And nobody's keeping track of the mess that those guys are making. And they just use all the water and they use all these chemicals and stuff in there. Where does that go? It doesn't get coughed back up and recycled. So I was wondering what Virginia's doing about that and what needs to, in the schools and stuff like that, programs to get people to solve the problem. Thank you very much. I appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, you raised a great issue with regard to fracking, and it's something that Virginia's behind the curve on addressing. A lot of the focus right now, believe it or not, is trying to prevent fracking from occurring in our national parks. And so when you think about something that ought to be sacrosanct and protected from that kind of activity, there's where we're at, is making sure that we don't open up our national parks to fracking. Right now, Virginia does not have strong or actually any regulations statewide with respect to fracking. We've left it up to our local governments to be able to say yes or no, and up until now, it's worked out pretty well. A lot of our localities don't want fracking to occur, and so our local boards of supervisors have been the way to stop that stuff. This year, there was legislation put in to develop regulations around that. I had a little bit of mixed feelings because once you develop state regulations, you actually open it up to legitimizing the practice, but it really is more of a stopgap. I think if you did it right, left the initial decision in the hands of the local governments, I think most local governments will say we don't want it, and then make sure that we have strong regulations on the back end with the state in case they say, yeah, we want to go ahead, so that we have some of those basic protections out there. But right now, we are behind the curve. We need to do better, and hopefully in the next couple of years we will be able to do that.
Thank you very much. The thing is, they can go down, and then they go that way in all different ways, and
Right.
It doesn't really matter once they do that basic.
Yeah, and a lot of it's a property rights thing. If you're correct to go down and side, and you have people who had nothing, they're not getting any profit out of it, but they're being affected.
Right, yeah.
Carla, you want to bring up a prison issue?
I don't really have a legislative question because every year we have very similar legislation that winds up in the Death Committee. And I agree with what Patrick said, that our problem is gerrymandering of the districts. We need to get rid of a few people who are fossils, I guess. Their minds are fossilized and they never will change them. I want to make a comment about the system, the nature of systemic problem that the speaker made earlier, because what we are running into now with the prisons is technology changes that are affecting our families negatively. For example, a contract was signed with an organization called JPay, which is handling the transfer of funds to prisoners' trust accounts, and that costs money. People, if they want to put a stamp on the money order and send it in, it will take up to 3 weeks or more to go through the office of JPay in Florida. Used to take just a few days when they sent it directly to the prison and a certain officer would deposit it. Now, if you want to get it there, not in 3 weeks, but before that, you're going to start with a payment of $7.95 for them to handle it. And they also just signed for health, a contract with Horizon, which is a for-profit healthcare organization that's been in the business for years and been sued, like according to ACLU, 600 times in the last few years. I don't know what we can do legislatively on this kind of problem, but there just are more bloodsuckers getting into the prison industry, taking money away from families.
Delegate Plum, is there any way to handle that through the executive action?
Again, I think changes in administration in Virginia gives us some potential here. A lot of that can be handled by executive action, but your basic point is a good one, and that is the emphasis throughout the country of trying to shift what have been public social services over to private enterprises. That tends not to work out well on the part of the people who are in need of the service, so we need to continue to be vigilant of it here in Virginia.
It's especially tragic because we know that people in prison, if they have contact with their families, then when they go back to the community, they're more successful. It improves family reintegration and reduces recidivism. So it's a very important issue. So, yes, right here. George is coming.
I just wanted to offer a suggestion for budget. All of our issues here refer to the budget, and I'd like to tell you that the death penalty is a budget sucker. My name is Terry Steinberg, and I represent BADP as well as my family. My oldest child was sentenced to death for a crime he didn't commit in Virginia, and they are retrying him, and I spent Wednesday in court listening to the prosecution and our side argue over the word expunged. My son's charges were expunged, he's still being held, they're still recharging him. This is costing the state millions of dollars. My son was innocent, he was found innocent by higher courts, and yet we are still suffering this nightmare. And I'd like to offer that money that we are using to kill my son back to the budget.
Wow, that's powerful. I think we've reached the magic time when we should adjourn. I want to thank the legislators especially. They have been just incredible. I think this has been one of the best wrap-ups we've had, and the attendance has been just terrific, amazing. I think this is the most we've had since the runs on the bus when we had 225. You can't compete with that. But our keynoter, special thanks. I'd like to invite him back when we should. When we could have a more in-depth, more time on the inequality issue, maybe package it with the movie Inequality by Robert Reich, which is just incredible. In closing, I want to thank all of those who co-sponsored and all of those who helped with the arrangements to make this possible. And closing is, I would just like to read, it's from my very favorite hero, Monsignor Gino Baroni. Let us pray that God will provide new gifts to meet new needs. Let us pray that there will be new voices of justice, new prophets who will hear the words of the Lord and stand up and say, yes, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He has sent me to bring glad tidings to the poor. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.